Hello, and thank you for joining me for the second installment in our grant writing series, Aligning Your Aims with Your Audience. My name is Ashley Staples. I'm the Director for External Fellowships and Scholarly Development here at Stony Brook. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm excited to be here with you to talk about this next important part of grant writing. So we will sort of move through a little review, but first I wanted to start here. So last week in the grant writing series in the first part, which was called Finding Your Funding Fit, we talked about how external funding could be a way that your career trajectory might move forward. And so hopefully if you were able to attend the previous session or watch it, you've started to think about how external funding might impact one or more of your inevitable stories going forward. So as you can see from this diagram, again, all of these arrows are sort of pointing in a general direction, right? Like a forward direction. And you can think of that as your sort of wider research career, where you're headed in the future. And not every single one of those trajectories is going to need external funding to be accomplished. But I really encourage you when you're thinking about external funding, so whether that's a fellowship or a grant or something like that in the future, you're really thinking about how you might plan in a pivot, a twist, something that's extending your research, maybe something new that you would like to do, but maybe haven't had the resources to do yet, and how that might affect how you sort of accomplish your overall trajectory. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to think about the term alignment, because the term alignment can mean many things. So if you think about the idea of alignment, that's really what we're going to talk about today. So aligning your aims with your audience. So you can kind of hear three things in there, right? We're talking about alignment, we're talking about aims, and we're talking about audience. So again, thinking of that previous picture, the trajectory, you're kind of aiming towards something, right? So now we're going to think a little bit about the idea of alignment. So you don't have to necessarily be aligned in all ways, right? But having great alignment is actually not just one direction. So we have up and down, back and forward, right and left, yaw and roll. And so I think that when we think about alignment, sometimes we think more linearly than alignment really is. And so sometimes when we are thinking, especially about an audience and about our research trajectory, especially as grad students or postdocs, sometimes we're kind of focused more narrowly, right? We're thinking sort of about some specific things, not necessarily the wider trajectory of potential alignments that our research could have with a funder's aims necessarily that would help us to understand our audience. So the idea of alignment can mean many things. And so I want you to be open to expanding how you're thinking about alignment for the purposes of your research funding prospects going forward. So the goal of this session is really to evaluate the attributes of your research or yourself as the researcher that showcase alignment with a funding opportunity. I just like this little thing because I got your back. I feel like we always think about, back alignment. Maybe everyone can take this opportunity to roll their shoulders back and make sure you have some good posture. But really thinking about how your research or you align. And I talked about this last time, but just as a reminder, we think about grants and fellowships. They're sort of similar kinds of funding, but they're focused on slightly different things. So typically, you have a project and a person. Typically, a grant is going to be sort of project first with the person coming behind as like a great person to do that project, whereas a fellowship is going to be person first, that person has a lot of potential, et cetera, and they're going to demonstrate that by doing this excellent project. And so, both of those kinds of opportunities are interchangeable, but they do have a different focus depending on what you're looking at. So this idea of thinking about your research or yourself becomes important when you're thinking about what part of my candidacy or my project's candidacy am I really going to sort of pitch to this funder, and what does that look like? All right. So just a reminder of the process, we're moving along in it today. So this is the sort of 5-stage process: explore opportunities, identify and strategize which of those opportunities to tackle first, develop your materials, engage in the review process, and then hit submit. So last week, we really talked about this explore opportunities. What options are there? I encouraged you to consider your strengths, your constraints, look at many options and make a long list. Think about your organizational buckets. How do you sort of organize these so that they make sense to you? And then get some advice, asking professors, other students, looking at association websites, just anything so you can kind of build out your list and really see what possibilities are available to you. I also sort of encouraged you that you need to think about sort of 4 areas of yourself as a potential grant getter, right? So you need to think about your research, your own characteristics, your goals, and then who's in your network, like your mentors or other folks like that. And so that can really help you to figure out a little bit how you might do some searching. So if that's something that you're still kind of working on, that's totally fine. And I encourage you that that's a living list, right? So that will change as time goes on. So who your collaborators used to be, you should add to them over time, or maybe revisit some that you haven't collaborated with in a while. And that is going to be great. So today we're moving on a little bit. We did a bit of identifying and strategizing last time. And so we're going to sort of add to that idea, and then we're going to move into developing your materials with today's session. So last time in How Should I Focus, we talked about this first part that's in the black text here. Which of your options are you eligible for first? Will any opportunities disappear? Which ones do you have time to actually go and pursue? Like, do you have a year to give to that particular fellowship opportunity, or do you really only have 6 months? So that's not a good opportunity for you. And then what applications basically can you get done in time? So today we're going to talk a little bit about evaluating fit more deeply. So is the timeline appropriate for both your ability and the stage of work? Once you read all those details on the websites, what more do you really need to know about the opportunity in order to decide, if it really is well aligned with what you're going for? And who in your community of stakeholders will need to be involved? Do you need to bring in additional people? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll also talk a bit about starting to develop your materials in terms of reviewing what materials you need to develop, determining your audience and how you would kind of go about doing that, starting the application to see the questions and the details, and making an editable template so that you have sort of the foundation you need to get started writing. So we're going to sort of focus on the second part, the determine your audience today. So in terms of reviewing what materials you need to develop, we kind of talked about that last time, really thinking about that identifying and strategizing and then developing the materials. Do you have time to do it? And some of this is really in the polish section. So we'll revisit and sort of deepen this in terms of engaging in the review process and making sure your materials are everything they need to be in order to not get sort of dinged for an administrative error, right? Like you don't want to create a material, an essay that just doesn't have the right header and kind of gets rejected on administrative review, which feels real harsh, but is absolutely something that happens. So you really need to pay attention to those kinds of formatting requirements. All right, so aligning your aims. I want to talk a little bit more generally about what it means to align your aims. Like, how would you think about this? What would you look at? So the first thing we need to do is examine our aims. So if we thought about all of those sort of potential inevitable stories, you want to think about yourself, and also your project in terms of like, where are you going? And if you're someone who's taking a little bit of notes on the side or trying to think about how this applies to you, this is a great time to just jot some things down or have a mind map maybe of like all the different areas that you are sort of hoping to impact. So you can ask yourself some of these questions, maybe write some answers down and then kind of do some evaluation to see how they come together. So how does the purpose of your project or candidacy align with the goals of the granting organization? So in order to see if something aligns, you have to ask yourself, what are the purposes of my project or my candidacy, right? Like, how am I trying to enter this space as a researcher or trying to have my research enter the overall scholarship about the thing I'm interested in? What are you personally hoping for professionally out of pursuing this? Are you hoping to enhance your CV? It doesn't have to be one thing. Are you hoping to, enhance your CV by getting a grant or a fellowship? Are you hoping to really be more connected from a networking standpoint? Are you hoping to fund your specific project because that you feel like is what you really need to get to the next step? And again, it could be all of those things, but writing them down can kind of help you make sure that you have them on your list of sort of goals. What are you hoping for personally? So maybe you're hoping to create some financial freedom during you're writing maybe your dissertation writing year, which is one of the examples I'm going to use later. So I'm going to throw that one out there as a maybe. Or maybe you are hoping you're someone who has always wanted to live abroad and do academic work, and that's just not something you've had the opportunity to do. Or you sort of personally want to be able to learn a new language, and that's not something you've had the opportunity to do. It can help you professionally as well as personally, but sometimes those are sort of different goals, maybe accomplished by the same opportunity, maybe not. And so it's helpful to, again, have those written out. Which parts of your trajectory, so this gets into the evaluation side, most align with your funder, which parts least align, and then really thinking, how does this opportunity, so grant or fellowship, contribute to your overall trajectory? And this is important because sometimes people really think about the grant or fellowship as the end game, right? Like getting that is the end game. But in every single one of these applications, you have to talk about how it's part of the long game, actually. So your trajectory is, you have this external funding, maybe it makes a difference in terms of how, what inevitable story you live out. But what you have to do is actually create an imagined future that you can tell the story to to the funder about how this funding would actually just be a part of a much larger story that the funder would be investing in by investing in you and or your project through fellowship or grant. And so sometimes we kind of are like focused on the prize, but the prize is actually just like a stepping stone. So we really need to figure out, okay, how does this stepping stone fit into our overall trajectory and contribute toward a larger goal that I'm interested in accomplishing? And so, these questions are not ones that you have to have firm answers to or that you have to answer all at once. But I do think that they are helpful when you're going into a grant writing process to have a sense of what you're hoping this accomplishes for you. And I'm a part of a team that's writing a grant now that's actually like a Stony Brook grant for, money to investigate an initiative that we recently started from a research perspective. And we are having to answer these questions ourselves, right? Even as a team, which is, okay, how do we see this particular grant funding a project that's going to move forward like our overall trajectory of this project, like this other initiative, right, that we've investigated. And sometimes we're sort of so focused on getting, what is the thing we want the grant to actually fund, that we're losing sight and have to remind ourselves, oh, we need to come back to this larger trajectory by having this initiative that we're sort of think is important and is changing what we're doing for graduate students here on campus. We want to investigate that to kind of prove how it's improving our community, because we think that that proof will really further help graduate students or whatever our aims might be. So you really have to kind of dig in. It's an iterative process. It's not something that happens all at once or is final once it's done. All right. So you also need to kind of examine the funder's aims. So in that example I just talked about, we're actually looking to apply for a National Science Foundation grant, right, which is focused on STEM students. But our bigger initiative is not focused on STEM students. We care about all graduate students here at the university. So we're having to really think about, okay, what does the funder want? What do we want? And what is the overlap between those things? So some ways that we are thinking about the funder's aims and that you can think about the funder's aims are, what do they want to do? So if you're thinking, for example, about the National Science Foundation, they're very clear about their mission in terms of wanting to, expand science and have a sense of how the, the science world impacts the whole world and how that interplay is happening, and broaden the impact and reach of the work of science. What do they want you to do? So for our grant, we have a specific call. Some of you may have heard of the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. That's like an early doctoral funding kind of program. They want you to accomplish it for that particular grant, to accomplish your graduate studies. But that's not every grant, right, that they give. What do they want to fund? If you're talking about the NSF, they want to fund STEM researchers. So if you're not a STEM researcher, then maybe you can make a case. Do you have a different intersection, or do you really need a different funder? Because that's not something that you are, that's not an overlap you're going to have. What kind of work do they fund? So we talk about this. So the two big kind of funding agencies that give a lot of grants in the STEM area are the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health. And they fund some work that overlaps, but they also fund work that does not overlap at all. And so kind of thinking about which of those organizations is going to be the best fit for you makes sense. And so all of this kind of culminates in how do your aims align with theirs, either from a research perspective or from a candidacy perspective or from both. But you really have to kind of interrogate what that funder wants in order to be able to answer these questions. So the next question I think is, so where do I go? How do I even start to do this? And I will say that the foundation websites usually is where you will go to find these answers. So I always send the slides out. These are live links to these 4 awards. The North American Conference on British Studies, for example, has awards and grants of some kind of a variety of kinds. So if you are a British studies person, you want to do any kind of study in the UK, and you're a member of this organization, you might have the opportunity to apply for one of these awards. The NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program I just talked about, the Link Foundation, which is one that recently I was looking into some fellowships, has 2-year doctoral fellowships for folks who are studying energy, modeling and simulation, or ocean engineering. And then the Association for American University Women has a few different fellowships, but this one is specifically the American Fellowship. So I kind of wanted to show you how I go through one of these examples and like how I think about aligning my my aims. So I have already pulled up in this window, I'm just gonna escape real quick, the AAUW American Fellowships call. Can I get a thumbs up from someone in the room if you're now seeing the American Fellowships page, just so I know that switched as I thought it should? Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, so this is the American Fellowships, the AAUW, and you can see kind of the basic information, right? So this is good. And when I read a call, I really am looking at like every word of the call first. So I am sort of thinking about, okay, they took the time in this call to tell me that this program began in 1888. Right. And so I'm like, okay, so this has been around for a while. They have been promoting, women in education for a long time. That's something for me to think about. So whatever I am doing, maybe my identity as a woman or if my research touches women is going to be very important to them. They've been thinking about this mission for a very long time. And they are also telling me that they are a large fellowship program, non-institutional source of graduate funding. They're not taking the time to put this on their website if they don't think it's important. This tells me a lot about what the funder wants to do, right? They want to support women in education. And then they tell me more specifically what kind of education, things like that. And then they have a couple of different awards, the AAUW American Fellowship. So they have a dissertation one, and it says it's specifically to offset scholar living expenses while they complete their dissertation. So this is not a tuition grant, right? So sometimes we can kind of be like, oh, I know what these words mean. I saw a dissertation fellowship, that means this, but that doesn't always, translate. So really reading is important. You have to use it in your final year, et cetera, which means, and this goes back to last week a little bit, but I need to, if I want it to be my final year, and I saw that this application deadline was in November, right? Which means I'm going to need to fly almost a year before in order to make sure that I have the opportunity to even get this award for my final year. So I actually need to be thinking about applying for this award maybe 2.5 to 3 years before I would use it to make sure I kind of have it in my plans of things to apply to. There's 3 types here: dissertation, postdoctoral, and publication. Sometimes I've definitely worked with students who see it as a dissertation option, but are maybe too late. And so then they kind of put it on their radar as a postdoctoral option or an early career option in terms of publication. They have a lot more information on this website in terms of award amounts, the timeline in terms of how this works. And this really helps us with that identify and strategize. This is kind of the deep dive piece, right? So we're in here, we're really looking at all the information, the eligibility, and that's great. So this is sort of what everyone needs to meet. Dissertation fellows have certain additional requirements, right? And there's some here that are not true of many other fellowships. So you're not required to study in the US. That's good to know. And so different folks can think about different ones. For aligning our aims with our audience, this will become important. They talk about the selection criteria and application review. So once you're in the website, it's not always as clearly listed out as this, I'll be honest, but this one is really nice, which is part of why I chose it as the example. They tell you exactly how and when the panel meets. They tell you how they try and ensure fairness. They tell you how the fellowship recipients will, or in selecting fellowship recipients, the different criteria will be considered. They do it as a list of bullets, which means that it's not necessarily one after the other, but it usually kind of indicates order of importance if they're listing things out in a list like this. And they kind of confirm that right here. The primary criterion for fellowship awards is scholarly excellence, and that is the one that they list first here. And then they say applications are reviewed by distinguished scholars and should be prepared accordingly. So that's something that I'll talk about a little more in a second. They have some regulations here in terms of what you can and can't use the funding for. Again, this is part of your deep dive, thinking about, is this an award that's going to fund what you need it to fund, or does it not? Because that will help you decide whether or not this is an application that is worth your time or not, right? So if you really need tuition, you can also do this, but maybe you have flexible funds. But if you need research dollars or something like that to actually like buy equipment, maybe this one isn't quite the right one for you. And then required components. And so this is sort of, you know, what has to go in the application. And again, all of these things are listed in slightly different ways on different applications. So I have now read a bunch about this actual award, but I also have the opportunity to go to the main site, right? And kind of look at basically what's on here. So I'm going to I wanted to do that with you, but I'm going to jump back into my slides because I've done some screenshots of this and I have a little bit of like highlighting that I think will be helpful. All right, so back to the slideshow. So this was the sort of main page, right? So you can see here, the first words here are equity now, and they have this vision. Together we can achieve a vision of equal opportunity for all. So I have a sense right away what the aim of the funder is, right? So how that might work. And this part that says about AAUW right up here might be the next place that I would go. So I've explored the fellowship. I've decided that it's for me in terms of identifying, strategizing, doing my deep dive. And now I'm trying to explore my funders' aims, right? What are they hoping to do? And so going in the website and actually looking at the funding, like the funder pages, looking at the stories they're choosing to highlight, like who is this girl and why is she holding that animal and what's happening? You know, those kinds of things. It seems like maybe extraneous exploration, but it's going to give you a flavor for what are the types of stories and narratives that this particular organization is hoping to be able to promote, because that you want to be one of those stories or narratives, and so that will help you kind of get into that. Once you kind of have a sense of what your aims are and what the funders' aims are, I encourage you to go ahead and make, you know, maybe a little a comparison list. So I'm using, I'm an education trained researcher. I did my PhD in higher education research, and I was studying interfaith engagement and development on college and university campuses. So I sort of am using my own story here as an example. And if I had chosen to apply to the AAUW for my dissertation year funding, what might that have looked like? So my aims in that are that I'm interested in financial support during my dissertation writing year. I'm hoping to get funding for research about student sense making, about religious, secular, and spiritual identity issues during their university experience, which is what I did my dissertation on. I was, like I said, behavioral science and education research. I'm personally kind of hoping, or professionally hoping, to make a difference for students who explore their spiritual selves as part of the university. That's often a component of the student self that doesn't have a lot of room all the time, in my opinion, at the university. And so I have a little bit of a focus on equity. Like, I want all students of all different religions, spiritualities, and non-religions to be able to do that. But you know, I'm focused on that kind of specific spiritual identity side of things rather than maybe other demographic indicators of equity. All right. So then when I think about my funders' aims that I found after doing that sort of reading on the website, they are interested in supporting women scholars pursuing full-time research opportunities. They support excellent scholars with quality and original projects. So thinking about, oh, that's something I'm going to have to kind of prove that I have, right? They promote active commitment to helping women and girls. They typically do final year funding for dissertations. They support all fields, but somewhere in their literature, they say that they have a preference for STEM or gender-focused research. And then they also support domestic or international research programs. So when we look at so this is our list. So I'll compare this in a second. And then I also wanted to think about, and what do the reviewers look for, right? So we talked about this a bit, that this list is available on the website, so you can kind of think about it. And you can see how the aims of the funders are reflected in this list. And so that's something that you're looking for, like how are you getting the information? And it's probably not all from one site, right? Like you're probably going to have to go to a few different pages. So the following criteria will be considered. We sort of talked about this. At the end is financial need, so that is a component. Sometimes that's not a component of a grant or fellowship application at all. Sometimes it's merit-based entirely, but this one does have a component of financial need. So that is something to think about. I also want to draw your attention that they have some focus on the project and some focus on the actual person. And so this is sort of a true mix, right? They're thinking about the applicant's scholarly excellence, but then the next two things are about project design, project originality, even the next couple, I guess. Yeah, we've got like scholarly excellence, but then sort of like 4 that are really about the project. And then we get to qualifications of the applicant, and then a focus on the applicant after that, which means that in my materials for this, I would need to be, really weaving a story that puts my candidacy as a potential fellow together with how great I think my project is and why. And so that was also helpful in terms of thinking about, okay, and what recommenders would be able to speak to those things, right? Which folks do I need to have in my corner for that? So this information is available as well. All right, so then who is reviewing? I pointed out that it says distinguished scholars. And so there's actually a page that recruits for scholars that's on this website to be reviewers for the AAUW. And these are the questions that those reviewers are required to answer when they put in an application to review. So they have to answer, would you like to contribute to women's advancement and education in the workplace? And they have to answer yes. They say that all panelists should have a commitment to advancing gender equity in higher education, the professions, and/or the community. So they are looking for that when they recruit folks, people who are active in advancing gender equity in these spaces. And then also that panelists should have a doctoral degree and be well published and involved in their fields of expertise. So they're not necessarily sort of discipline focused, right? You can have a doctoral degree across anything, but they really are looking for this advancement to gender equity. So again, that shouldn't be surprising based on all of the other information we have, but helpful when we're thinking about how do our aims align. So now that I know all of that, you kind of want to identify your matched aims, right? Like which of the aims are working and which maybe aren't. So when I look at my list and the funders, my 2 lists that I created of my aims and the funders' aims, the ones in red are the ones I feel like are kind of aligned together, right? So I'm interested in financial support during my dissertation writing year, final year funding for dissertations. That's something that they do. I'm interested in getting funding about this research for student sense making, and I'm in the behavioral sciences. This does support folks researching in all fields. So that's great. I don't necessarily have a STEM or a gender focus, but that's fine. This is not necessarily in my aims, but they support women scholars pursuing full-time research, and I identify as a woman and pursuing full-time research. And then I believe that I am an excellent scholar and I have a quality and original project. So, I feel that these are kind of the areas that I'm aligned. However, I have some, in the black text is the ones that maybe don't align as much, right? So my scholarship is not necessarily promoting active commitment to helping women and girls. So one of the things that I can do is potentially innovate. So Often we think about, supporting the thing that we're doing, but I would encourage you maybe when you're thinking about aligning your aims with your funders, maybe some brainstorming, maybe with your stakeholders as well, with your advisor, et cetera. I want to apply for this. If I had a little extra support, what could I do? How could this be different? Or we do this all the time for grants, is sort of like, okay, well, we want to fit a grant call, right? We want something sort of specifically here. We were thinking of this. Maybe we could just add on this component that we think is interesting, but didn't really have a place for. But now that's really going to help us to be able to cast this in the funder's aims. And so let's go ahead and do that. So here's some questions you could ask yourself. Are there questions you could pursue to match the funding call that won't derail your initial questions? Especially if you're going for dissertation funding, you've already done a lot of work to get there, right? So you can't just be like, oh, I found this fellowship, I'm going to do a whole new project for my dissertation. That's not what we're saying, or for your thesis or whatever. We want to make sure that you can kind of stay on there, but maybe there's a component. So we've had students, for example, who are interested in, actually have been doing perhaps incorporating some machine learning or AI stuff, and that's been of an interest, but then they use an application that really wants that to be able to develop that idea a little bit more and include that more firmly into the work that they're doing. And then also, do you have a different part of your story that is more relevant than your current day-to-day that will help you focus on this? So for me, I kind of went in my example to the first one, right? Is there a question about spirituality specific to women and girls, either their experiences or their outcomes that I could incorporate into my dissertation study? Is that something I could make a point to comment on to be able to talk about how this particular study is going to impact those folks? And there is. Generally, spirituality is a more salient component of university identity for those who identify as women, but that's, neither here or there, but that's something that I could have done in this in terms of innovating. I also, perhaps I'm not maybe, for example, really concentrated on a particular part of my story. Right now, maybe I'm not doing as much work for like women and girls, but I have been involved in organizations that were very focused on that in the past. So maybe that's something I would want to revisit and think about how to incorporate that, into something I'm doing now, or could incorporate that and think about something I'm doing now to demonstrate that like overall commitment to the betterment of the scenario, the world in terms of opportunities for women and girls. So this kind of innovation might be possible, or it might not. And so you might decide you have enough alignment without innovating at all. You might decide you have enough alignment with a little innovation, or you might decide you don't have enough alignment. So this idea of innovating with your stakeholders is really important. So we just kind of ran through a whole process, and you will do this maybe more quickly, right? I just wanted to break down the steps because sometimes we don't think about how we're thinking. I learned from a dear friend in the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning that's called metacognition, thinking about how we're thinking. And so I wanted to break it down. Like, how would you actually read through this and sort of consider your alignment? You might not do quite this whole process, or maybe it would be helpful for you to do this process a couple of times with a couple of opportunities, get kind of used to it, and then go into evaluating other opportunities from that baseline. But if you're going to innovate, innovating with your stakeholders is important. So I've had many conversations with students thinking about, okay, so when should I be applying for these things? If I want to do this, I need to be applying this summer, or, oh no, not that opportunity yet. I need to have it on the horizon for next. So what is my timeline? Both for applying for a fellowship of some kind or a grant, and also for completing your work. Like, I've talked with students and I said, well, if you got this grant, would you be willing to extend your entire doctoral program by a year? And some of them go, absolutely not. And that's okay. That's a perfectly acceptable answer. And others go, actually, I was kind of thinking about that already. Like, I'd really like to do this and I'd like to do this. So, I don't mind thinking about that. And sometimes that question changes over time, right? You talk to someone in their third year, you're like, would you like to extend? They're like, no. And then I talked to someone, they're in their fifth or sixth year, and I was like, well, would you be willing to extend? And they're like, oh, actually, yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that because, they're just at a different point in both life and their academic journey at that point. So thinking about that innovation in terms of timeline, thinking about innovating your research questions, or is there sort of an angle or an addition that you might do? Sometimes research methods. So for example, I didn't, but I didn't use a particular sort of feminist theory or anything like that for my research, but there absolutely are feminist theories that I could have used for my research. Maybe that's something that I could have innovated in order to better match this call. That also would have overall improved my dissertation. That is something to think about as well. You could also think about innovating dissemination methods. So for example, in mine, I maybe would have done the study exactly the same, but I would have really thought about how I would communicate this sort of to stakeholders who have an interest in how women and girls engage in higher education, and maybe spirituality would be a key component of that kind of effort. Really thinking about these various inevitable stories. So thinking about, okay, so if I got this and this, then like my story would look like this. And if I got this and this, then I would move forward on this path. And if I got this and this, then I would move forward on this path. Sometimes we're sort of afraid to talk to our advisors or our stakeholders about all of the different possible trajectories because one, maybe we haven't thought them through, or two, we might feel like they will only support the one trajectory is maybe all we've really talked about. But if there's an opportunity to really bring up these different trajectories with your key stakeholders, it can be really helpful in terms of garnering the support you need, and also perhaps thinking about things that, you haven't thought of yet. That can be really helpful. And also narrowing or broadening your trajectory, right? So maybe it helps for a particular opportunity, especially on a project. Maybe you had like 3 aims. Maybe for a grant, you're going to focus, right? So you're not going to talk about all 3. You're really going to sort of try and get the grant for this particular research line because that's the most aligned with the funder. Whereas if you're talking about maybe more of a fellowship where they're looking for someone who has potential to impact the world in like a variety of ways, maybe keeping 3 objectives is going to be helpful. And so again, that can be helpful to have a conversation with your stakeholders. And if it doesn't work, if your innovation, you don't see enough initial alignment, and then in your innovative thinking, you don't feel like there's still alignment, then that's okay. And that means that you check it off the list. But I often say it's much better to check to decide something's not on your list or not worth, the effort to put the application in for any number of reasons from a place of a place of being informed rather than just like missing the deadline or not getting it together or something like that. If you've made an informed choice, that's an entirely different way to decide something is not for you, right? All right, so then you've decided there's alignment. How do you demonstrate that alignment through your materials that you're putting together? You're going to focus on the content of your application, the content on the purpose of the funding opportunity. And so that's kind of where that narrowing the focus makes sense. So sometimes we are tempted, and especially I remember being and coaching those who are in dissertation writing, you're in sort of a place of writing that you are conveying everything you've ever learned about everything. And that's part of the challenge, right? Like that's part of what you're asked to do in sort of proving that you know what you're doing enough to be a researcher who has like vetted credentials and all that kind of thing. But when you're doing one of these fellowship or grant proposals, they're reading a lot of proposals at once. So they're looking for folks who can focus and sort of really cast the story of how their project is aligned with the funder. That's what they really want to see. And so you might include some of the broader picture of what you're doing, but you're going to really want to focus in that content. And that's where the revision process, which we'll talk about a little more next time, comes into play. You'll want to highlight how your candidacy or project is a good fit for the granting organization. So how do you see this coming together? And that helps, like maybe you're not necessarily saying the mission of AUW is that together we will ensure equity for all, right? But you're using keywords like equity or women or girls, or you're all these keywords that you've discovered after going through the website. You're sort of homaging that you really know what this organization is about at every juncture in your language, and that is going to help demonstrate that it's a good fit. You're also sort of talking about the things that they seem interested in because you've looked at some of those narratives on the website that they've chosen to promote and seen how those narratives maybe connect with your own, either your personal narrative as a scientist or the narrative of your project, and you're drawing those out. So you don't need to be a sort of like blunt as I'm a good fit because of this, this, and this, but it should sort of be demonstrated in your materials. And again, the revision process really gets you from sort of first draft where that's happening, but maybe is blunt or confusing, to a final draft that's really cohesive and succinct and kind of gets to the point. You're going to write with the audience in mind. So I have one particular example of this. So I work with an undergraduate scholarship that is sort of multidisciplinary. So there are disciplinary reviews, but also the part of the challenge is for the undergraduate students to talk about their research to folks across disciplines. And often I encourage them to think of, if they are, a New York-based, maybe grew up in the area, are going to Stony Brook, and they're sort of a New York-based student who has done all of their research either like here or at BNL or Cold Spring Harbor, so they're really familiar with this area. I encourage them to think, and maybe they're a biology student, right? I encourage them to think that they're talking to like a really smart computer scientist professor in Iowa, right? Who doesn't know anything about New York and doesn't know anything about the names of things and isn't a biologist, but is super smart and knows how to do research and all that, and that helps to kind of get us out of maybe some of our more technical jargony groove because we're writing to this multidisciplinary audience for that particular one. So knowing a little bit about these reviewers, so for the AUW, for example, we know that they have a focus on gender equity with their careers, but they're multidisciplinary from all kinds of different backgrounds. And so having a more accessible entry point for scholars of any sort to be able to engage with your work is going to be really helpful. Ensure that each piece of the application showcases your most relevant story. So sometimes we're going to have, again, we have all of these stories going on. Sometimes one is going to be way more relevant. So for AUW, for example, I would maybe talk a lot more about my experiences as a woman scholar than I would in another kind of fellowship application or grant application. And then really crafting what you want to say by considering what the reviewer needs to hear. So if you think back to that list of application criteria, again, the first one was on the applicant's scholarly excellence, right? So they need to hear that somewhere in your application, both from you and probably also from your letter writers. So you need that to be kind of a focus. But then they want a quality and original project, this, and this, right? So thinking about, did I leave space for the right stuff? Or am I talking, did I maybe concentrate too much in my first draft on like the technical methodology that I'm going to be using? And that's not unimportant, but it's maybe not what they need to hear to be able to score my application based on the criteria that I sort of know are out there. Or maybe they really need to know about your methodology, but they need to know how innovative it is, because that's part of what they are scoring, is that you're doing an innovative methodology. So you need to set the stage for that, and how are you doing that, and what does that look like? So some of those kinds of things are, again, helpful to have an idea of to start, get writing, and then they really come out and get like sort of buffed up, shined up in the revision process. So some helpful questions to ask: how will the sections of the application be presented to reviewers? Sometimes a less important question is actually the first thing or what feels like a less important question is actually the first thing the reviewers read. So I always encourage students and applicants to download the PDF of the application. Most of the time, that is what the reviewer will get on the other side, and really think about, okay, what's the first block of text that they get from me? Because sometimes the first block of text might be the thing you didn't even think about writing until the very last minute. And so it's important to think about like, oh, what would that look like? There's no guarantee that reviewers read your application in sort of the flow of that PDF. But I will say, having been a reviewer on the other side, I often do, because that's just how it's presented. It just makes it easier. What is the scoring rubric or method reviewers will use? Sometimes this is transparent, sometimes it's not. They did give us kind of that list though. So I would make sure, even if it's my own sort of read through, like, do I demonstrate each of these things to the best of my ability in my application? How will reviewers be discipline specific, area specific, or general? We talked about that a little bit already. What other projects or people similar to mine or me have been funded? And so thinking about that can help you perhaps cast your candidacy. Are you kind of you feel like your narrative really fits with exactly what has been funded before, and you feel like it's a really good fit because you see that, or you feel like you're really adding something because you are maybe a bit outside of what they usually fund in terms of person or project, but you really think that you're making a good case for how you will add to the sort of richness of their funding portfolio by including your person and project in it. And then how much space is available to craft the story of this project? This can get a little dicey because at the end of the day, sometimes some fellowship, I work the most actually with some fellowship applications that are only 3 to 5 pages. And so they feel like they're going to be easy because it's only 3 to 5 pages of writing. But 3 to 5 pages to include all of that information is terrible. It's really hard to do, especially on the first go, and especially how most of us work, which is, to be honest, we kind of like throw it all out there and then we need to revise a few times. And so that's part of why revision is even part of this process, because most of the time getting everything you need to get into these things and really to demonstrate your alignment, having all of those components of what the funder is looking for in there in 3 to 5 pages is a really difficult task, especially when as academics we're used to having as many pages as we want, or sort of a limited word count is like 7,000 words, right? That's a lot more pages than 3 to 5. And so those are some of the things that you need to be thinking about when you're going to demonstrate alignment. So in terms of next steps, what I would encourage you to do is, assess alignment. Maybe pick one of your favorite ones that you have started to think about, one of those funders that you're interested in or have thought about before already, and kind of list out your aims and list out their aims and sort of see what happens. And maybe it's 2, right? Just so you can see what's different. You can see how it stacks up against each other. You can even look at the 2 funders' aims next to each other and see how they're similar or different. Are you picking 2 funders who are sort of in the same area? Are you picking maybe one funder that's maybe a little more aligned with who you are as a researcher and those characteristics, and then one funder who's maybe a little more aligned with your research and thinking about research goals and trajectory? That would be good. Find those review guidelines. Do the work to figure out where those are. Once you've started looking for review guidelines on these websites, it becomes easier and more you can be more efficient with how you actually do that work. And then decide if there's enough fit or alignment, and when I say to start writing, and when you would start writing, what sort of time period would you do that in? So at that point, when you've decided there's alignment, that's when you really go back and you're like, okay, let me put a timeline together so I can sort of figure this out. And I really encourage an editable draft. So if you have the opportunity to see what the questions are, I usually try and put together like a Google Doc or something like that, something there where you can get feedback easily. So whatever format that is for you, you want to have some formal reviewers, you want to have some peer reviewers, maybe use the Campus Writing Center or graduate student writing support to be able to have some sort of low stakes readers look at your work. And then of course you'll want to have, it available for your letter writers, your dissertation or thesis advisor, those kind of folks who are going to have to write in support of you. You want them to know what you're saying. And so those editable documents that are easily shareable can be really helpful for that. You also may at that point decide you don't quite have enough alignment and maybe you need to sit down and innovate and decide whether or not this is going to be a good opportunity for you. Stay engaged. Oh, this is the wrong information, but I will correct that before I send it out. So next Monday is the final installment. The third is pieces of the application puzzle. And I'll be talking about, so with all of this information that you have to fit into these, sort of small number of pages, like how would you possibly do that? And what are some things that you can think about in terms of revision and engaging in that process? And so I hope that you will be able to join me for the third session. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to contact me via email. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording for those who are in the room if you have any questions you'd like to ask while we're here together. So thank you so much, and I hope to see you next week.